is to import himself another glass of vodka and took a sip. Heavy thoughts wouldn't leave him, accumulating in his mind like a thundercloud ready to burst with thunder and lightning. Because of this, he hardly felt intoxicated, even though half of the bottle was empty. For snacks on the table, there were a couple of sandwiches with sprats and pickled cucumbers. He never thought he could feel such emotions, that he would suffer and torment himself after what he had done. Does he even have a hint of a conscience? No, unlikely. It's probably just a headache from the weather. But why does he feel so heavy-hearted? Why is he drinking and not getting drunk? He can't forget her eyes, that gaze, the last gaze when he turned and walked away from the city dump, leaving her there, weak and miserable, so painfully pale, emaciated, tormented by illness. And yet, she didn't reproach him. She understood and accepted his decision. She didn't ask or beg, she agreed. But in that gaze, there was a spark of hope. She still hoped that he would change his mind and take her back home, to the apartment, so she could live a little longer in torment and die there on that couch. But he couldn't bear to look at all of that anymore. Yes, she was a wonderful, loving, and faithful wife, a good housewife. But the last year of their life together had turned into hell for him. She became completely weak, frail, constantly exhausted, tired from the slightest household chores. And then she fell ill. The doctors, gave a grim diagnosis. They said the treatment cost so much that even in their wildest dreams, they couldn't afford it. So all they could do was wait for the inevitable end. And it wasn't that simple. Not for his wife, who knew her end was near, but for Istan himself. Of course, he felt sorry for Nina. But constantly being there for her, serving her food and drinks, washing her, and taking her to the bathroom, changing the sheets and dressing her, seeing this whole nightmare and waiting for her suffering to end, listening to her breath at night, lying sleepless in the darkness, afraid to get up and check if she's still breathing or not, it became unbearable for him to be in the same room with her. It was horrifying from the smell of sickness to the sight of her body and agonizing agony. And the thought that soon that body would be lifeless, and then he would have to live in that room, sleep on that couch where a cold, lifeless corpse would lie, and then deal with the funeral. There's no money, not even for her medication, and there's no point in dreaming of a new couch after her death. It's better if she frees him from all of this. Well, why should he endure such torment? Let her die somewhere on her own, without him. When he came to this thought, he felt relieved. He suggested that Nina come up with something, somewhere to send her. She looked at him with puppy eyes, stayed silent, bit her lip, and nodded. She agreed on her own. The only problem was sending her somewhere, but there was no money either. Yes, and why should he spend his savings on her death? What benefit would he gain from it? Such thoughts kept him awake for several nights until he finally made a decision. A cruel and abrupt decision that should have made him feel ashamed if he had such a feeling. But he had known since childhood that the sense of shame and guilt rarely manifested in him, even when he committed blatantly bad deeds and childish pranks. He would be scolded and shamed, pretending to feel remorse and repentance even though he didn't truly experience any of it. And now he was completely calm and even happy that he had come up with such a beneficial solution to get rid of his dying wife without any additional financial expenses. He simply drove her to the city dump. So what? People live there too. Various homeless individuals. They dig through the trash, find sustenance for themselves, make homes, shacks out of discarded furniture and junk. They live there and die there. So let Nina be there, and he would live in his apartment on his couch without witnessing any of it. Let's go. I've arranged it, they're already waiting for you. I gathered a few things for you. You don't need much there. Thank you, Istan, for everything, for your care and love, for taking care of me despite everything. You're such a kind person, Istan. You're very kind. She trustingly went with him to the car, glanced back at the apartment window before leaving, realizing that she would never return there. She sat in the car and silently drove, unable to speak about anything. Yes, he was silent too. Unsure how she would react to where he was taking her. When she realized where her final destination would be, she took a deep breath and didn't say a word. Her blue eyes filled with tears, but she continued to remain silent. She didn't ask him to take her home. She didn't beg. She didn't even look at him as they walked hand in hand through the trash. He led her to an old broken chair and sat her down, placing a small travel bag with her belongings beside her. What difference does it make where one dies? Only when he stood up, he briefly glanced at her face and saw those eyes still looking at him with hope and that childlike belief in goodness. That naivety pricked his heart like a needle. Spring was in full bloom, and her blue eyes were pure and beautiful like the sky. She couldn't believe that he would act this way, hoping that he would change his mind. She hoped and believed until the very end. But he didn't change his mind. He walked back to his car with firm steps, without looking back, got in, and drove away. He left behind years of married life, love, care, and happiness. He left behind the dreadful illness with no cure. He left behind his Nina, forever erased her from his life, and tried not to remember or think about her anymore. Not the cheerful, tender, affectionate wife she had been for him for so many years. Not the unhappy, sick, fading martyr she became this winter. But why does everything still remind him of her? Why does he dream of her face at night, only the one he saw there at the city dump? He dreams of her bottomless blue eyes, the color of cornflowers in the wheat. He dreams of the expression she gave him the last time they looked at each other, and he wakes up sweaty with pain in his chest, as if someone placed a stone on his ribs. That's when he wants to drink and forget, but it just won't be forgotten. Could it be that conscience actually exists? So this is how it looks, a linen weight in the head and a stone on the chest at night. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done, and nothing can be changed. Yes, he has no intention of changing anything. He's fine being alone. Even earlier, when Nina had just started getting sick, he had to help her with household chores, and then everything fell on his shoulders entirely. So he got used to cleaning and cooking everything himself. And now, when there is no need to take care of a bedridden patient, it's even easier for him. Now he is his own master and does what he wants, not what is necessary for the family or for the sick wife. He decided to drink, and he did, without paying attention to anyone or explaining that he needed to relax. He prepared whatever he wanted for himself, even sandwiches with spreads. And there is no need to make broth or porridge for her, only for himself. He did what he wanted to do. However, the sense of freedom didn't bring him much joy. For some reason, he increasingly felt the urge to drink. But vodka wouldn't take hold, he wouldn't get drunk. Thoughts still swirled in his heavy head, and the stone in his chest wouldn't go away. But why was he so tormented? She must have died a long time ago, and yet he was still suffering. How much longer could this go on? Summer had already passed, and autumn was here. Leaves were turning yellow, mushroom rains were gathering, and he still couldn't get her out of his mind. And she appeared in his dreams almost every night. When will she let him go? Istan took a bite of a lightly salted cucumber, pushed the plate away, grabbed the remote control, and pressed the button. Let the TV distract him, at least. What's on? Football news, some action movie. Oh no, another cheesy romantic series about country girls and city slickers falling in love with simpletons head over heels. Who believes in such sappy stories, fairy tales about otherworldly love for women? Maybe there's a boxing match, or at least an action movie. Images flashed on the screen, but he stared blankly, not realizing what he was watching, what movie was playing, what the plot was about. His eyes started to close, and his body relaxed. He slipped into oblivion. A dark, thick, risen asleep engulfed him. For a while, Istan was used to falling asleep like this, right in his clothes, wherever he sat and drank. As morning approached, his body became completely stiff in an uncomfortable position. He started to toss and turn, groaning, and woke up again with the same vision. She appeared in his dream once more, and again she didn't reproach him, didn't hate him, didn't get upset or curse him. She looked at him with trusting, pure hope, and he felt the same weight on his heart that he couldn't shake off, free himself from, or forget. In the semi-darkness of the room, the television still showed something. Commercials were playing. Istan's hand instinctively reached for the glass with undrunk vodka. He took a sip, sat there slightly swaying, grabbed the remote control, and turned off the TV. He laid down on his side first and then turned to face the wall, but sleep wouldn't come anymore. He lay there without sleep, drowning in jumbled thoughts until dawn. In the morning, he hastily fried 2 eggs while the coffee was boiling. The eggs burned on the skillet as he scraped the eggs off the skillet. The coffee spilled and hissed on the gas stove. Everything slipped from his hands. His body ached, his head throbbed after a difficult night. He didn't sleep or rest, but there was nothing he could do. It was Monday, time to go to work. Istan had changed several jobs in the past 3 months. When his wife fell ill, his company initially helped him. They granted him a leave for care, and then a paid vacation. But then he started drinking more often, and the management caught the smell of alcohol. After 2 conversations, they fired him. The third time he tried to get hired as a security guard in one office or another, but when they checked his background and noticed that he drank, they quickly got rid of him, saying he didn't pass the probationary period. Istan was angry. He wasn't an alcoholic, it was just the circumstances, the stress, and all that. He only drank not for the sake of getting drunk, but simply to calm down, like a sedative. But he didn't want to explain that to those dim-witted bosses who only thought of themselves. And now he is still a security guard, just like before, but now in a supermarket instead of an office. This job is much harder and more responsible, and they pay much less. Yes, they also find him frequently, but there's nothing he can do. There are no other options. After the drinking sessions, there was hardly any smell left. After all, he only had a couple of glasses. The coffee and eggs should have brought him back to his senses. He swallowed the coffee and burned his mouth with the boiling liquid. He spat it out, left to breakfast, and went to shave. While he was washing up and shaving, the scrambled eggs turned into a rubbery sole, and the coffee cooled down completely, becoming unpleasant and tasteless. At work, Istan tried to be professional, focused, and attentive to suspicious customers. On Monday mornings, there weren't many of them, since most people were going to work. It was mainly elderly pensioners coming in for bread. They didn't buy many groceries now since everything was cheaper at the market over the weekend. Or young mothers on maternity leave with babies and strollers might come by. There were hardly any regular customers in the morning on Monday, well, except for some wealthy individuals who might come in to buy red or even black caviar to go with champagne, just like that couple over there, elegantly dressed in super expensive clothes, standing and choosing live trout from a large glass aquarium. The salesperson was hopping around with a big net, offering helpful advice on which fish to choose. Judging by the salesperson's hustle and bustle, they were indeed wealthy clients. It seemed like they mostly came here for delicacies. He actually handed the major of black caviar, and the man casually checked the expiration date on the jar. He didn't search for where it was written in small print, he knew exactly where to look. Apparently, he bought it frequently. Oh, they went to the display with oysters on ice and picked out fresh ones. Well, there are such wealthy people indeed. They probably have a fancy Lexus parked by the entrance. They stroll arm in arm, choosing black caviar. Oh, and he casually grabbed expensive candies into the shopping cart. They're heading to the checkout. Are there no more delicacies in the store worthy of your attention? With bitter envy, Istan watched the couple as they headed to the checkout. While they were waiting in line, he circled around the cash registers and positioned himself at the exit. He wanted to get a better look at them. The guy was undoubtedly cool, and his outfit matched the watch on his wrist, probably cost as much as this thing doesn't earn in several years. Yes, and the lady was dressed magnificently, not provocatively or vulgarly, but expensively and tastefully. They seemed calm, as if there was nothing special about spending more on those wet, stinky oysters than Istan earns in 2 months. And that irritated Istan even more. And the way she looked at him, how she clung to his arm, how he glanced at her and embraced her. Could they be in love? Usually, such stylish guys go for younger girls. But there's something both familiar and unfamiliar about her. Could she be a celebrity? Work at this didn't have seen her before. When they stood face to face with the security guard, she looked up at him. Istan froze as if scalded. Those eyes haunt him every night in his haunting nightmares. Those eyes will haunt him for the rest of his life. And those blue eyes, like cornflowers in a pristine field with long, fluffy eyelashes, now glanced at him with an indifferent gaze. She walked past him to the entrance, arm in arm with her companion, but then she stopped, glanced at her companion for a couple of seconds, and then slowly turned around, surprised, as she scrutinized the security guard in his worn-out uniform from a different perspective. She looked at him with surprise and bewilderment, as if she couldn't believe it was him, that she had encountered him again in this life. A familiar voice sounded, and he stood there, unable to utter a word. He blinked his eyes and didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth and closed it, not making a sound. The smell of yesterday's alcohol reached her. She wrinkled her nose slightly, as if to recoil from the unpleasant odor, and from him himself, as if she remembered the stench of that city dump where he left her to die. "Istan, is that you?" She repeated the question, though the answer was already apparent from his reaction. "Yes, it's you, Nina," he managed to squeeze out. As her ex-husband, "Well, yes, it's me." "So now you're a security guard here?" she asked the obvious. "Yes, a security guard. This is where I work now." "Listen, how are you? I mean, how are you here and like this? Aren't you dead yet?" Istan babbled, not understanding what he was saying. "Yes, I'm not dead, and I have no intention of dying anymore. When you left me on the city dump, threw me away like an unwanted thing, I had to find shelter and sustenance among the homeless. I scavenged for food among the waste brought by garbage trucks from all over the city. I found a diplomat case that belonged to Oscar. It contained money, a lot of money, and very important documents. I tracked down Oscar and returned the diplomat case to him. That's how we met. He was shocked by my story, and in gratitude, he paid for my treatment abroad. Now I'm completely healthy and happy. Well, I wish you luck too." Istan tried to keep her voice from trembling, from breaking every time she recalled that time. She felt that feeling of dreadful hopelessness, loneliness, and fear all over again. She was a little helpless kitten who couldn't do anything on her own, and when discarded in the garbage dump, she felt certain she would perish. How terrified she was back then, how she flinched at every gust of wind, at every sound that rustled. She was alone in the whole world. She spoke. Oscar embraced her tenderly, as if wanting to protect her from the memories of those events, of those days on the dump, of the betrayal and horror she had to endure. He wanted to shield her from her ex-husband and everything associated with him, his actions, that dreadful illness. Wishing her ex-husband good luck, Nina smiled at her Oscar, and they walked hand in hand out of the store. The astonished security guard remained standing, stunned, with wide eyes and an open mouth. The meaning of what had been said barely reached him. So now his ex-wife is healthy and wealthy, and it seems she's happy in her new marriage. That man Oscar was looking at her like that, and he was clearly buying all those delicacies for her too. Istan scratched his head for a long time, paying no attention to the passing shoppers nor to the cashiers who exchanged glances and pointed at him. Then he went outside to smoke, looking at the ground and not seeing anything around him. He stood around the corner, mechanically inhaling the smoke and exhaling it in a cloud, but his thoughts were far away, and the events of the bygone spring back then. Before throwing his wife on the dump, he first suggested the chief file for divorce. He explained to her that this way, she would become lonely without a family or a provider, and then they wouldn't demand payment from him for a stay in the hospital or hospice. They would no longer be a family, and she had no savings, let alone a salary. That's how it goes, as they say. He, of course, initiated the divorce for a completely different reason. He hurried to complete all the paperwork to do it before she died. At first, he thought that then he wouldn't have to shell out for her funeral. After all, he wouldn't be her husband anymore, so he wouldn't be obliged to pay for her. Let the state bury her. And later, when Istan came up with the idea to simply get rid of her before she died, he thought that no one would bother looking for her, and if they found the body, it wouldn't have any connection to him. He could always say that they got divorced, that his ex-wife left him, and he didn't know where she went, and he had no relation to a dead body on the city dump. So the divorce was the most profitable move for him at the time. He hurried with the procedure as best he could. He even bribed someone. Then, as soon as everything was settled, he gathered his wife's belongings, along with her passport, and took them far away from his apartment. After leaving his wife at the dump, he moved on to the next question. He evicted her from the apartment to avoid overpaying for utilities and to sever any connection between him, his apartment, and his ex-wife. And now he had nothing to say to her. If she were still his wife, maybe he could demand money for the divorce, since these lovebirds wanted to be together. Why not? This Oscar guy clearly seemed wealthy. It would be great if he paid, considering the love between him and Nina. After all, he spent a fortune on her treatment, and he dressed her up nicely too. He could have paid for the divorce as well. Ah, if only he had known in advance. Istan stood and smoked until the cigarette butt burned his fingers, but he only noticed it at the last moment. His eye stared at the asphalt, as if into emptiness. Thoughts jumped around, interrupting each other: greed, envy, regret over missed opportunities. If it weren't for the cigarette, he would have started biting his nails. He reached the corner to throw the butt in the trash can and froze. Oscar helped Nina get into the car. The car looked as if it had just come out of the showroom. Istan thought it was worth much more than his apartment. His nails dug into his palms. He clenched his fists so tightly throughout the day. He couldn't concentrate at work, received a reprimand, but didn't even pay attention to it. The management walks disappointedly as the careless security guard floated in the clouds and smelled of yesterday's hangover. Perhaps he didn't deserve another chance. Istan walked home on autopilot. Along the way, he stopped at a pub and ordered a glass of beer. He sat at a table and mechanically sipped the cold frothy drink, hardly tasting it. He had a second glass after the first, then a third. The beer disappeared, but his thoughts couldn't come together. Istan couldn't snap out of the shock. What he had seen today completely turned his thoughts and feelings upside down. He didn't remember how he made it home. Automatically opened the door to his Chevy one-room apartment. He didn't feel like eating dinner. In the room, on the coffee table by the couch, stood an unfinished bottle of vodka from yesterday, and on a plate lay a semi-dried herring sandwich and a wrinkled, flaccid, partially eaten pickled cucumber. Istan sat on the couch and poured himself half a glass of vodka, drinking it in one go without eating anything. He sat for a long time, staring at one point without undressing. He collapsed on the couch and dozed off. During the night, he had a dream, his ex-wife again, this Nina, only not the look she gave him there at the dump. No, today she was beautiful, healthy, wealthy, happy, well provided for, with a caring fancy man who fed her black caviar. Today, she was the way he saw her walking hand in hand with her new husband towards the luxurious car. Today, for the first time, he woke up in tears, tears of despair, greed, envy, and powerlessness to grab hold of any of that foreign wealth. In the morning, an interesting thought came to Istan's mind. Before throwing Nina on the dump, he had courted her for some time, and courting these days is expensive. Why not remind her and her little husband about that? Maybe he could get something out of them. Istan got so excited by the idea that he didn't even notice himself pouring a shot of vodka. Damn it, how could he go to work now? But the thought of realistically getting money from this couple kept pounding in his head. He waved his hand. He'll skip work. There's no line for such a job, so he'll just get a reprimand, and that's it. With his brain softened by alcohol, it painted very cheerful pictures for him. Istan already believed that he was absolutely right, that he should do it this way, and everything would work out for him. The man poured himself a cup of coffee. Phrases started forming in his head that would surely help him. He got up and sadly looked at the empty bottle. No worries, he would soon buy himself some liquor. Not the cheap stuff, but something good. Istan grabbed his keys and left the apartment. He just needed to find out where this Oscar guy lived with his Nina. Apparently, not far from the store where he worked. There was a private neighborhood nearby, a whole street of mansions. An hour later, he stood in front of the gate. There was a familiar car in the yard, and then he spotted Nina. She was swinging on the swings, those big beautiful ones, and reading a book. Istan pressed the doorbell. A dark figure detached itself from the house and moved towards the gate. Damn, Istan didn't expect there to be security here too, although they were the same kind of security guards as he was. Couldn't they come to an agreement? The guy opened the gate made of iron bars and stared questioningly at Istan. Hey buddy, how's it going? I'm a security guard too, just like you, colleagues. Istan smiled happily at the guy, but the security guard's face remained impassive. I need to talk to Nina, she's my wife, and she owes me money. The security guard raised an eyebrow and mumbled something into his radio. After a minute, Oscar himself appeared, accompanied by 2 more security guards. He approached and looked at Istan. Why did you come here? Istan smiled happily at the guy, but the security guard's face remained impassive. I need to talk to Nina, she's my wife, and she owes me money. The security guard raised an eyebrow and mumbled something into his radio. After a minute, Oscar himself appeared, accompanied by 2 more security guards. He approached and looked at Istan. Why did you come here? Istan said, well, I courted Nina, she can confirm it. Maybe you can reward me somehow, I wouldn't refuse some money. Oscar smirked, and Istan started feeling uneasy. He suddenly realized that they wouldn't give him any money. Disappointment washed over him, almost making him cry. Well, at least something. Oscar simply turned around without a word and headed towards the house. Istan wanted to follow him, but strong hands grabbed his shoulders. Half an hour later, Istan, visibly bruised, limped on one leg, with a warning not to approach this house, and made his way back to the store. At least he'd go to work. Stingy people, they're all the same when they're rich, no one wants to spare any money. Istan opened the door and froze. A young guy in a security guard uniform stood in his place. The uniform was new and neatly pressed. What the hell is this? Istan approached him. Who are you? The guy wrinkled his nose at the smell of alcohol. And who are you? I work here, I'm a security guard here. Oh, you're Istan. Well, come on, the manager is waiting for you. An hour later, Istan stormed out of the store. Not only was he fired, but they also held him accountable for significant losses. Istan had performed his job poorly, and on the cameras, it was clear to see people taking everything off the shelves. Meanwhile, the security guard was either dozing off or picking his nose. Istan was so angry that he bought 2 bottles of vodka right away. He didn't have any snacks, but who cares? At home, he downed a glass in one gulp, then another. He didn't remember falling asleep, but by morning, it was Nina again, and not that sad look of a beaten dog, but a new one, confident and contemptuous. Istan woke up in tears again. Why? Why does someone have everything while he has nothing? Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.